There was once a farmer named Thomas, and if you had met him, you would have liked him immediately. He was clever, patient. He worked from the first gray light of morning until the last of it drained out of the hills. His hands were rough in the way honest hands are rough. His fences stood straight, his tools hung in a row on the barn wall, each one clean, oiled, and exactly where it belonged. Nobody in the village had ever called Thomas lazy. That was not his trouble. His trouble was quieter than that, and far harder to see. Thomas believed that for everything there was one perfect moment to begin. The perfect seed, the perfect soil, the perfect week of weather, when the rain would come soft and the sun would come kind. He believed that if simply thought long enough and watched closely enough and waited wisely enough, that perfect moment would arrive and announce itself, and he would step into it fully prepared. And so each spring Thomas prepared. He studied the sky, the soil, crumbling it between his fingers and frowning at it like a man reading a letter he didn't quite trust. He walked his fields at dawn and at dusk. He asked himself questions very carefully. Was the ground warm enough? Was the frost truly finished, or only pretending? Would the rains hold? Every question was reasonable. Every question deserved an answer. The trouble with careful questions is that they breed. Answer one, and two more are born in the night. His neighbors, meanwhile, simply planted. Old Bram planted the moment the snow pulled back, far too early, muttering that the early seeds catch the season. Half his rows froze. He shrugged, replanted, and by autumn learned exactly how early was too early, a thing no book had ever taught him. Young Perrin planted too late, distracted by a wedding, and swore he would never make that mistake. He didn't. The widow Hesta planted her rows too close together out of hope, watched them choke each other out for light, and the next year gave them room to breathe. Her second harvest was the talk of the market. Every one of them got something wrong. Thomas watched all of it from the edge of his own untouched field, and drew the lesson that felt so obviously true. Waiting is wisdom. Look at them, he thought. Look at all that wasted seed, all that hurry. He was not being foolish. He was being very sensible, and was avoiding their mistakes. He simply did not notice that he was avoiding everything else along with those mistakes. There are people who can tell you every reason a thing might fail, and not one memory of what it felt like to try. Thomas was becoming one of them. Slowly, the way the kettle becomes hot, without a single moment you could point to call it change. He told himself he was almost ready. He told himself that it would be next season. Once he understood a little more, once the conditions lined up, he would finally begin in earnest. It always sounded true when he said it. That's the strange thing about waiting. It disguises itself as wisdom because both of them are very quiet and both of them sit very still. And from the outside, you honestly can't tell which one is sitting in the chair. Spring became summer. He noticed, he told himself, summer was better for observation anyway. Summer softened into autumn, and other farms filled their barns. Thomas filled his notebooks. And here is a small, humbling truth about life. Some people become genuine experts at getting ready for a life they never quite get around to living. They can price every shovel in the market. They can tell you the finest tool for turning soil they have not yet turned. Their plans are immaculate, and the most beautifully organized dreams, it turns out, are very often the ones that never happen. The seasons did not argue with Thomas. That was the thing about them. You could argue with Bram, and Bram would argue back. You could argue with the weather, shake your fist at a cloud, and at least you feel you had been heard. But the reasons never raised their voice. They simply moved. Spring did not wait for him to be ready. Autumn did not check whether he had begun. He looked up one evening, and the boy who used to run past his fence chasing a dog was now a young man, walking home to that same fence with a girl on his arm. When had that happened? Thomas could not have told you. It had happened the way everything happens to people who are waiting, all at once and somewhere else. New barns rose along the valley. Old Bram's beard went white. One winter, quietly, Bram did not come to the harvest festival, and everyone understood and raised a cup, and the valley folded his name into a long, soft memory. And still the frost came, and still the frost left, and still the fields greened over as if grief were simply another season to plant through. Thomas began to feel a small, cold thing in his chest that he did not have a name for. It came to him fully on an ordinary morning, which is how these things almost always come. He was leaning on his fence, watching Perrin, not young Perrin anymore, laugh with his sons over some ruined row that a late rain had washed flat. They were laughing at failure, and Thomas realized slowly that Perrin's whole farm was built out of failures exactly like that one. Every wrong guess had taught him something. Every drowned row had drawn a map. Every bad season had been paid like a coin for a piece of wisdom he now owned outright. Bram's mistakes had become knowledge. Hesta's mistakes had become knowledge. Perrin's mistakes had become knowledge. And Thomas, careful, patient, respected Thomas, had made almost none of those mistakes, because he had made almost none of those decisions. He stood very still with that. It didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like cold water finding its way slowly through wool, until suddenly you understand that you have been soaked for hours and simply hadn't let yourself feel it. All those years, he had been so proud of his clean record. He had never once considered that a clean record and a blank page looked the exact same. He walked back to his barn, not entirely knowing why. In the corner, beneath the canvas he hadn't lifted in longer than he wanted to count, stood an old wooden chest. He knelt, opened the chest. Inside were the seeds. Dozens of bags of them. Good seed. Seed he had saved a year to get. Keep dry. Kept safe. Kept away from every risk that might have spoiled them. He had tended those seeds faithfully. He lifted one bag and loosened the string and poured it into the palm of his hand. The seed was flawless, whole, perfectly preserved, not one grain wasted, and not one grain grown. They were exactly as perfect as the day he had set them aside. That was the whole horror of it. They had cost him nothing and become nothing. He had protected them so completely from the ground that he had protected them right out of ever being what they were supposed to be. A seed kept perfect is not a seed. It's just a small hard thing in a bag waiting for a man to be brave enough to bury it. He sat with that for a long time, the way you would sit with it too. The next morning, Thomas planted. Not because the sky was perfect. It was ordinary, a plain and undramatic gray. Not because he had finally learned enough, but because he had finally understood the one thing that all of his studying had somehow skipped. That the perfect conditions he had been waiting for were never going to come. Because they had never once existed in any field for any farmer in the whole history of the world. His first crop was a mess and a marvel. Some rows came up crooked. One patch drowned. A stubborn corner near the well went green, gold, and too heavy. Better than anything in Perrin's land. And Thomas laughed out loud at it like a man meeting an old friend. He got things wrong. He got things gloriously wrong. And every wrong thing whispered to him what to do right for the following year. And for the first time in his long, careful life, Thomas already knew there would be a next year that he actually walked into. He was not smiling because the harvest was good. Parts of it were poor. He was smiling because he had finally, at long last, joined the living. The neighboring farmers had plenty, too early, too late, too deep, too shallow. They lost crops. They learned. They laughed. They argued. They adapted. They lived. Thomas made none of those mistakes because he made almost no decisions at all. The saddest field isn't the one where crops failed. It's the one where nothing was ever planted. The perfect moment never arrived. Life simply did. If you enjoy ancient stories that reveal timeless truths without the fluff, like this video, and subscribe. There are many more stories waiting to be told.